You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle and 24/7 Sports. It is the last podcast, the last episode of the preseason. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me is my co-host and partner in crime. He is your Denver Broncos reporter for 24/7 Sports. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, it's finally over, dude. We can stop worrying about, well, we're going to talk about it tonight, but tonight's the last time we really have to analyze who's going to be on this roster, who isn't. We actually get to talk about some games that matter.
Yeah, until tomorrow when the whole roster is upended even further. But yeah, you know, it's 1 week until the regular season, games that count for real. Last night didn't even feel like a game. It felt like a scrimmage. So I'm excited to get into the regular season.
Absolutely. And it's kind of weird because, I don't know, I always forget this time of year that, you know, you go, oh, Friday, the day after, that's when the cuts are going to come. But it's always the day of is when the most brutal cuts. Like any shockers, you know, all the players that you were really wondering, it's like the guys we're going to talk about that have already been cut on Friday. We all kind of knew they were coming. Like they were no-brainers. They're you know, right. There might be questions as to whether or not they're going to come back on the practice squad, but like the guys were all still wondering whether or not they want a job. That's going to come Saturday, and I sometimes forget that really that's what teams do. They get rid of the no-brainers on Friday, cut, and then they wait to see what's on the waiver wire, then they make their final, you know, cuts on Saturday.
They also kind of, I think, scout the film a little bit and take one last film study and see if they're worth keeping or worth getting rid of. So they want to take every second they can.
That's a good point. And I wrote about that on Friday. In fact, it, you know, kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But these guys that got cut today, you know, the Broncos gave them a great opportunity, even though they're cutting them, because all these guys, Marcus Rush, you know, he got his foot in the door. And even though he's not making Denver's 53-man roster, he put 4 quality games on tape for the other 31 pro personnel offices to, you know, go through and recognize, and he will get picked up, I think. Marcus Rush might not happen today. In fact, even if he got claimed today, we wouldn't know until tomorrow. But I just have a sneaking suspicion that he's got a home somewhere in the NFL. And even if Marcus Rush does not get claimed, Zach, I think that he's a guy that could end up back on the practice squad, depending on what happens with Mr. Jeff Holland.
Absolutely. The Broncos have a few players they cut that were just victims of the numbers game. They just had too many players at positions where they couldn't keep them on the 53. Marcus Rush is one of them. Jordan Leslie is another one of them. I'm going to get into him in just 1 second here. They have put good film on tape in the preseason, and that's what the benefit is of playing, you know, all 4 quarters or most of the half in a preseason game. So Marcus Rush is definitely a guy I think will either be back in a Broncos uniform on the practice squad or get another opportunity elsewhere in the NFL.
So we have some stuff to get to from the preseason finale. We're going to touch on just a few takeaways. We don't need to dwell on it much, but then we're going to get to the cuts on Friday, and then we are going to go through a 53-man roster projection. Zach published one late Thursday, right after the game, and we're going to go through that and see what's what. But first, we got to say thank you to the sponsor of today's show, Audible. You guys go out and get yourselves a free audiobook download and that 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. There's over 180,000 different titles that you can choose from, whether you're on an iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. I use this app today. I use it just about every day because I love to read and I love listening to stuff, audio content, and I don't always have time to sit down and turn the pages on the books that I want to read. So Audible allows me to get these books under my belt, learn something, be entertained while I'm doing other things. So go to audibletrial.com/huddleup. You'll love it too. You're going to get a 30-day free trial and a free book for giving it a whirl. Just make sure you go to audibletrial.com/huddleup. All right, so the Broncos go in to Arizona for yet another preseason finale against the Cardinals. It seems like that's their last opponent in the preseason each and every year. But they got off to a slow start, but came out ahead, won the game 21-10. So it's good. We don't need to overanalyze necessarily what a win in the preseason finale means, but at the very least, I think it's good, even though those were all depth players and backups, for the Broncos to establish a little bit of momentum, and especially that those 2 wins they garnered in the preseason, Zach, came on the road.
That's a good point. I don't put any stock in the preseason because didn't they go 4-0 last year? And you saw what happened in the regular season. It is nice. It's always nice to get a win. It always, boosts their confidence. But I want to see what happens when Seattle comes to town.
Most definitely. So I think the main things to kind of touch on from the preseason finale is, speaking for myself, I was expecting more from Chad Kelly getting the start. Now, it's not like he completely tanked. I mean, the guy, if you look at his stat line, the kid went 12 for 19, 126 yards, but his QB rating was only 60.4. And, of course, what really killed him was that interception on the initial possession. And if you go back and watch the tape on that, I think Kelly deserves most of the blame because he's the guy that uncorked and pulled the trigger. But if you look at the route that River Craycraft ran on that shallow cross, he allowed the linebacker to basically disrupt his route and slow him down. And Chad Kelly, he saw that defensive end initially step like he was going to rush, and so he leaves his eyes to find his target, doesn't see that he's dropping back. I think that if River Craycraft is able to elude that linebacker in the middle and get a clean release across the field like that, he probably ends up, might not have been a completion, but I think he would have at least been there to disrupt that defensive end from picking off the ball. But regardless, Chad Kelly, it kind of took him some time to respond from that snafu. He eventually did, and we saw him making some plays and, made a few really solid throws downfield. But it wasn't exactly what you wanted to see from a guy that's looking to punctuate an impressive preseason performance with yet one final, planting his flag, so to speak. Hey, John, Mr. Elway, I'm your backup.
Yeah, it's ironic because before the game, Elway actually said that he thought Kelly did enough to cement himself as the number 2.
Right.
And then Kelly picked the worst time to have his worst game in the preseason. I think fans were used to him making those big splash plays, leading scoring drives, and he came out a little tight, a little tentative, a little indecisive. And that interception, I agree with you, it was mostly on him, but I think he threw the ball a little too hard also. And a better receiver, it would have been an incompletion. It said Demaryius Thomas or Manuel Sanders. It was on Craycraft too, but yeah, he came a little tentative. I didn't like to see that. He didn't play loose, and I don't think the offensive play calling did him any favors either. It was a little too conservative for my taste.
Yeah.
They were very horizontal, not vertical. I wanted him to take some shots down the field and open up the field a little bit, but yeah, it wasn't his best effort, and he really didn't do much. I think, even though I think he will be the number 2, I didn't think he did enough to cement himself to secure that spot and leave no doubts as to why he deserves that position. I thought he could have had a better effort. Hopefully, he didn't damage his stock too much.
Yeah, it's not like an authoritative throwdown like Royce Freeman where you come out of it going, there's no question. Now, I still don't doubt myself what the Broncos should do. I still believe that Chad Kelly should be the backup moving forward. Don't waste time trying to find an outside guy unless just some perfect gem fell into your lap. But if you look at what happened, because you're right, I mean, there was a lot. The Broncos were running the ball like crazy, even on that first drive in which they really moved the ball until that pick. Obviously the point there was the Broncos know what they've got in their wide receivers. They're basically 6 deep if you count Isaiah McKenzie. There wasn't really any questions as to what can the wide receivers do. What it came down to, what they really wanted to see was how the big uglies on the offensive line, which ones we're going to separate. Let's get one last look at these guys. And then also, clearly, they were allowing D'Angelo Henderson and David Williams to just battle it out.
Yeah, I thought Henderson really stood out in that game, and he showed why that he shouldn't be cut, and he showed that if he is cut, it won't take long for him to resurface again in the NFL. The guy just has a professional skill set. He ran the ball really well. I think Vance Joseph called it a spirited effort, and I'd agree with that. He ran with authority. He showed power, quickness, hops, like live up to his nickname.
Yep.
He deserves to stick around, and I think he staked his claim for that reason. In terms of the offensive line, though, I want to touch on this real quick. They didn't do Chad Kelly any favors either. He was under siege for most of the first half, and that's a point of contention for me because the Broncos really, really need a guy to develop on the O-line, and they don't have it. God forbid the front 5 gets hurt in the regular season. It was very discouraging that he wasn't helped out by his play calling, by his supporting cast. But from the first team offense in the first half, I was very impressed with Henderson.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, his wiggle, you could tell this was a guy that was like, look, I recognize that my NFL career is on the line, and I'm not going out like a you-know-what. I'm going to throw it down. And he did. I mean, he didn't have any of those huge splash plays like we saw from him in the preseason last year where he's rumbling, 45 yards down the field for a touchdown. But every time he touched, he was just electric. You could just feel that something was about to happen. And he finished the game, D'Angelo Henderson, with 53 yards rushing on 11 carries, and then he also hauled in 3 receptions and had one that was for a first down get erased on that same opening drive in which Kelly threw the pick due to a holding penalty on Billy Turner. But, one thing to keep in mind, too, as it relates to both Chad Kelly and just the overall, you talked about the pressure. Arizona's defense, I know it's just preseason, okay, and you can't read too much into it, but I was shocked when I was doing some of the pregame stuff, doing the game week hub, everything you need to know on the website post, and I was going through the press release that the team sent us, and one of the things I noticed right out of the gates from the Cardinals is that they had already taken the ball away in the preseason 14 times.
Wow.
14 times before yesterday. Now the Broncos, they turned it over once on that Chad Kelly play, but this is a surprisingly good defense, and I was surprised also at how deep they were until Paxton Lynch got in there and Bill Musgrave dumbed it down a little bit and ran some read option spread. They pretty much had the Broncos bottled up, so you got to tip your cap to them a little bit as well.
Yeah, the Arizona defense is pretty nice. People kind of underrate them, but even their backups, you kind of have some of those defenses that are more prone to creating turnovers and causing havoc, and you did see it last night. One more point about D'Angelo Henderson.
Yeah.
I want to take it back to him for just 1 second. Sure. There was a report that came out that teams were garnering interest in him around the NFL, and I think he read his own press clippings to that point, and I think he wants to show that he does deserve to stick around. He does deserve to be playing for a team this season. So on the first team offense and among the notable players that played last night, there weren't many. Henderson was definitely one of my top stars.
I'm going to be irritated, Zach, if the Broncos waive him and keep Devontae Booker, because Booker has done literally nothing in the preseason. I mean, I've seen him pick up a couple of blitzes and, as far as something positive and notable, but he's really done nothing. And granted, he hasn't gotten near the amount of work that a guy like D'Angelo Henderson has on the third team, but I just don't understand how you could pass on. If this is all about the ultimate meritocracy where the best guy plays and the best guy deserves a roster spot, there is under no circumstance any reason why Devontae Booker would deserve a roster spot over D'Angelo Henderson except for draft pedigree. And yet you look at him, Booker was a 4th-round pick, Henderson was a 6th-round pick. They're both John Elway picks. I don't understand this love that the coaching staff apparently seems to have for Devontae Booker. It mystifies me.
Yeah, he hasn't done much, and I've been one of his biggest supporters. A lot of people hate on him, and we've both actually have defended him on this podcast, and he has really not, done us any favors or helped us out. Yep. He's run like he has weights around his ankles. He hasn't done anything. He's supposed to be the home run hitter. He's not hitting even singles, ground rule doubles. He's doing nothing. So he's being outshined by at least 3 other running backs, and those 3 running backs should be on the roster. Now, the only reason I would think they can get rid of Hop, even though they shouldn't, is because his skill set is very similar to Royce Freeman. They're both kind of built the same. They kind of run the same. And like I said, Devontae Booker is supposed to be that home run guy, the best pass catching back, the most senior back on the roster. And Vance likes to play favorites. We saw it last year with Will Parks, for example. He likes his players, and I think Devontae Booker is on his one of his pets. So that's why he could stick around. But they have a decision to make. I'd rather than get David Williams on the practice squad than get rid of D'Angelo Henderson. That's just my take.
Well, the thing with David Williams is I wrote about this on Friday too, that I don't think he's going to get waived. But it's not the last you're going to see from David Williams in the orange and blue, because the Broncos like him, and he showed enough to come back to the practice squad, especially as a 7th-round pick. But he didn't quite, I think, show enough to really pop or flash to draw the type of attention from the other 31 teams that would warrant a waiver claim. Because the other thing about a waiver claim is that not only are you taking up a roster spot or even a practice squad spot, ostensibly, but depending on where you're at in the order, if you use your claim, I'm not sure exactly how that would work before week 1, but what I was going to say is if you use your claim and you're the Broncos, for example, the Broncos picked 5th in the draft, on the waiver wire, they're the 5th team that gets. So if a player drops from the first guy, the first team doesn't take him, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, The Broncos are the 5th team every time a player gets waived that they can decide whether or not they want to put a claim in on him. So if you do that this early in the season, I'm not sure, now that I've said it, whether or not that sets him back to the back of the order, but it's still something that you got to wonder with David Williams. I don't think NFL teams are that incentivized. I think he's safe enough to be slipped to the practice squad where, you can call him up, Zach, if you've got a rash of injuries to the running back stable in November.
Yeah, it's actually a great point. I think he would slip through waivers and they can sneak him onto the practice squad. And if it came down to the two, if you put D'Angelo on there, he's going to get plucked off the practice squad. Yeah. But I think David Williams, they can hide him on there. And if there's an injury, if they want to call him up, they can. So I fully agree with you. I probably would keep 4 running backs, and we'll get into that on the 53 in just 1 second here. Yep. I would not keep Williams. I would keep Henderson. I guess keep Booker, Lindsey, and Freeman. And then you have Janovich as the fullback. I would go very running back heavy for this offense. I would not leave Henderson off the 53.
I agree. And another reason for that is, the Broncos are deep at running back, and that's a plus, but they're also extremely inexperienced. So you want as many bodies there as you can get who can make plays in case guys fail to rise to the occasion, or they get dinged up, or they're not used to the wear and tear. Most college players, especially running backs who are touching the ball 15 to 25 times a game in college, they're used to their season being over in November. And that's really when things just start ramping up for professional players. And Devontae Booker experienced that as a rookie, even though he led the league, or the team, in rushing. He really hit a wall that second half of the season because as a rookie, he's just, it takes some getting used to for these guys, an endurance aspect to it. So I agree with you on the 4 guys, and we'll talk about that again here in just a minute. But before we move on, we got to talk about Paxton Lynch because he came in and defied all the naysayers, defied all the boo birds at Mile High, and had himself a game. Like, it was the most carefree, poised, find another description for it, at peace, just like he didn't have a care in the world, and he was just out there playing football and having fun. Now, there were some X's and O's to it, obviously, Zach, where this was a guy that, obviously, Bill Musgrave, kind of dumbed it down. You didn't see him operating the full, quote-unquote, Case Keenum offense like Chad Kelly pretty much was when he was in the game in the first half. Instead, you saw the Broncos run a lot of shotgun spread looks, a lot of read options, where basically Paxton Lynch gets the ball, snaps the ball, got it, makes one read. If it's there, unload. If not, oh goodness, we're in some trouble.
Yeah, I'll say this about Paxton. Credit where credit's due. He came in, threw 2 touchdowns. I think he only had 1 incompletion. He looked in command of the offense. He played, like you said, carefree, very poised. And sometimes when you play loose and have fun out there, that's when you get your best efforts. So I give him credit for that. Now, on the flip side, how sad is it that our expectations about our former first-round pick is that he came in on the 4th quarter, the second half of the 4th preseason game, and dominated 3rd and 4th and 5th stringers. It kind of works both ways. If it's really sad that it got to this point, that it took 2.5 years, 2 years and 3 preseason games for him to finally show what he can do, and it's against backups. So I give him credit. I think he felt the pressure. I think he knows his job was on the line, and he came out and responded. Now you have to weigh that against the expectations for him, and if that one effort can outweigh all the years of regression and all the bad performances we saw as recently as last week and the week before.
Why, Zach? Why was he suddenly so confident? Why was he suddenly so loose? What was it from a psychological perspective? If you could get inside the mind of Paxton Lynch and you could answer this question, what was it about yesterday, Thursday night's game, the preseason finale, that you think Paxton Lynch was so loose? Did it have something to do, you think, with him just feeling like he can sense that his time in Denver's coming to an end, so he's kind of, the pressure is being deflated out of the situation, all the expectations, to where he can just go out and play? Or do you feel like it's the reverse of that, where maybe he's like, I'm at the home stretch, they're not going to cut me, I'm the first round pick, I've got a roster spot, I'm just going to go out and have fun?
I think it's a mixture because all the quotes that he gave during the week, he was very copacetic with his position with the team. He wasn't worried about getting cut. He said he wasn't facing any stress or any undue stress. Like I said, when you go out there and you just have fun and you play what is a kid's game ultimately, and you just let loose, and that's you sometimes get. I mean, look at Brett Favre. He made a career out of that. Sometimes you get good efforts, and Paxton just picked a pretty good time with his job on the line to have one of those efforts. So he was playing very carefree, very, very loose. He was playing the opposite of what we saw from Chad Kelly, who was very tight, very tentative. He just let it out there and let it rip, and fortunately he connected. He made a couple nice throws. That touchdown down the seam to Lacoste, that seam route, that was a bullet. That was a very nice throw. I don't take that away from him. But like I said, the expectation is that he can come in the last preseason game and throw a couple touchdowns. It's gotten to this point. It's pretty sad. And does that outweigh what we've seen the last 2 years?
It can't. I mean, and that's what irritates me about the whole thing is that my opinion is, and just based on things I've heard and been told, I think the Broncos had resigned themselves. They were resolved going into the finale that Paxton Lynch was one way or another not going to be on this 53-man roster. And yet, when you go out and earn a quarterback rating of 141.8, you only have one incompletion. You eclipse 100 yards passing in one half and throw for 2 touchdowns, plus convert one 2-point conversion with your legs.
Right.
Now it reforces another conversation. And John Elway being John Elway, we've talked many times on the show about the egg on the face and, the pride and the hubris and all this. If he can find a reason not to give up on a first-round pick that he made, especially a quarterback, I think he's going to try and find that reason. And for that, it's just like the team needs to wash themselves of this situation with Paxton Lynch. And there's just something nagging at me now that performance was enough to hang on. And instead of that favor we talked about last week on the show, how Chad Kelly has done the Broncos a favor by not only showing out and proving he can be a backup quarterback and really being ahead of the curve in terms of his development where everyone's expecting him to be, but he also allowed them he gave them an extra roster spot. They don't have to budget for 3 quarterbacks anymore, and they can use that third spot on another premium position, and then in comes Paxton Lynch in the 4th game and screws it up. Now, if it was for a good cause, I'd be clapping my hands about it. But as you talked about, you have to compare it against an entire body of work. There's no reason to believe that it's a trend for Paxton Lynch. It's more of an outlier and an anomaly based on what we've seen.
I 1,000% agree with you, and I actually wrote that almost word for word, that his performance last night gave Elway another reason to preserve his ego for one more year. That was all he needed. He needed just anything, any semblance of hope, progression, and fortunately he got that in Paxton Lynch. That night couldn't have gone better for him, with Kelly kind of not doing so well and him coming out and throwing 2 touchdowns. If Elway was looking for a reason, he finally got it, and you know how big his ego is, and he runs based around his ego. So, yeah, I would prefer the Broncos get rid of him still. I don't think that does enough to ensure his roster spot, even though it would cost them more to get rid of him than to keep him based on dead money and his structure. I just would rather open up the roster spot and give it to another receiver, running back, offensive lineman, and go into the season with Chad Kelly as your number 2 and Keenum as your number 1, and I think they can get by with that.
For what it's worth, Mike Glennon, the guy who, and you wrote about this on Wednesday, there was a report that the Broncos were tentatively attached to Mike Glennon as a possibility if he was going to get cut, maybe even as a possible trade target. Who knows? He came out, played really well with the second team unit for Arizona. Went 8 for 10, 69 yards and a touchdown, 128.8 rating. So for whatever that's worth. But then reports came out Friday that the Cardinals completely plan on keeping him, and in fact keeping 3 quarterbacks. And that's the other thing to keep in mind with the Broncos as we get into this next segment with the 53-man roster is they've kept 3 quarterbacks the last several years. So I think they're it's not like it's an alien idea going into the season with 3. So I think, getting back to this, John Elway, they're looking for reasons to keep Lynch, and we'll talk more about it here in a second, but I think the odds are in Lynch's favor at this point. In fact, before we get to the 53-man roster projection, though, I just got to remind you guys really quick. It's off the website. There's nowhere that you can see it at the website, milehighhuddle.com, but you can still the code's still good. So from now until I think it runs through the weekend, you can get 30 days of Mile High Huddle 24/7 Sports VIP, okay, for 1 cent. You use the code FIRSTMONTHMHH at checkout. First month MHH, and that gets you locked in for 30 days for the cost of 1 penny. And that'll give you access to our insider forums. That'll give you access to all of the deep dives we do with player evaluation, the film rooms, everything we do on that side, all of our premium content. You can get access to that for 30 days and give it a try. This is an opportunity for you if you've been thinking about going VIP, but you just haven't quite gotten over the hump and pulled the trigger. This is your chance to do it at the cost of 1 American penny. So you go, you click sign up, click the monthly option, okay? And at checkout, type in first month MHH. You'll be locked in for 30 days at the cost of 1 penny. And then, you can decide for yourself. You can put our content to the test and decide whether or not you feel like the value is there. You want to stick around beyond that. But it's going to be a phenomenal season. And I guarantee you give it a try for 30 days, you're going to want to stick around. So before we jump to the 53-man roster projection, let's just touch on all the guys who were released on Friday. And I'm just going to go through them real quick, Zach, and then anything that jumps out to you, we can hash it out. But the Broncos waived the following players: Jordan Leslie, the wide receiver; Jeremiah Patasi, the offensive guard; John Diarse, the wide receiver; Marcus Rush, the outside linebacker, we already touched on him; Antonio Simmons, another interesting young outside linebacker, edge rusher; the wide receiver, the former number 1 overall pick of the CFL himself, Mark Chapman, he's gone. They waived Deshaun Williams, the big defensive tackle from Clemson. Marcus Rios, the cornerback who spent some time on the active roster last year, was waived, but he was waived injured. So if he doesn't get claimed, he could end up on injured reserve and sticking around with the Broncos for 1 more year. The other cornerback, Michael Hunter, gone. And then also wide receiver from Colorado, Bryce Bobo. J.J. Dielman, the offensive guard, also waived injured from Utah. And then the offensive tackle, Austin Fleer. I think that pretty much captures everyone that was released on Friday, Zach. So what jumps out to you there? I mean, obviously we touched on this at the top of the show. No huge surprises, obviously, on day one of the cuts, but your immediate takeaways and gut reaction.
Yeah, and something named DeQuinton Osborne was also waived, but who cares about him?
Right.
Jordan Leslie, that's one name that jumps out to me because he led the Broncos in receiving this preseason, and he looked pretty good. And it's just, I guess, a numbers game. They have too many receivers than they know what to do with right now. Too many on the 53 as it is. So he jumps out to me. I think he comes back on the practice squad. Mark Chapman, the CFL number 1 overall pick, he looked pretty good. I think he is a practice squad candidate. I liked a couple other players that they released. A couple of linemen, developmental lineman Fleer, that he's a local product. He really impressed Vance Joseph, Elway, and Matt Russell when he worked out for them at his pro day. So they have some young talent. I think they can bring back one of those corners, either Hunter or Rios. Rios played pretty well. At times, he looked better when he was healthy than Brendan Langley. He's a good young guy to keep around. So yeah. I think among these, whatever it is, 13 or 14 players, I think you could see up to a handful come back on the practice squad.
Yeah, I think Marcus Rush, for me, is one of the top candidates to come back if he makes it through waivers. Also Deshaun Williams, that big defensive tackle. And the broadcast, Brian Greasy and company, they touched on it quite a bit, in fact, in the finale, talking about Deshaun Williams. Just a big, explosive guy at the point of attack, but he never really got the type of opportunity that you would hope he could see because the Broncos are so deep on the defensive line. And there's just so many roots that are already sunk in that particular unit that he just never really got himself a chance to shine. And I think he'll eventually land somewhere. I like John Diarse. I think he showed enough to at least be in the conversation for a practice squad, but he's a guy. It wouldn't surprise me if he ends up getting claimed. I don't think Chapman's getting claimed. I don't think Jordan Leslie's getting claimed, even though he led the Broncos in receptions and receiving basically for the preseason. There's just nothing special about him, but there's something about Diarse that I think he might eventually land somewhere. And Marcus Rios, you touched on, I mean, he supplanted Brendan Langley last year, late in the season. He gets called up from the practice squad because Brendan Langley just completely failed in his purview when he was given the chance to be that third, fourth cornerback. Going back to that Oakland game, everyone remembers Talib gets thrown out for the chain incident and all of a sudden Langley gets thrust into the forefront. That was really where the rubber met the road for him. He was put to the test, and he was just completely exploited and picked on, and the dagger of that game came at his expense. And it was enough where the Broncos were like, we got to do something. So they call up Marcus Rios, and he ends up finishing the season as the fourth corner behind Talib Harris and Roby. So the Broncos like him. He just could never get up that head of steam this year because of that injury. So I think the team's kind of hoping, Zach, they're kind of crossing their fingers that he slips through waivers so they can put him on injured reserve and keep him for one more year.
Yeah, he has that leg injury too. I don't know the severity of that. If that's, like you said, if he goes unclaimed, he might go on IR or PUP. We don't know his prognosis yet. He did look good last year, and they do need cornerback help because Yadam isn't ready. He got beat for a touchdown last night, and we've touched on Langley almost every week. He's just, I think, already approaching bust status. I mean, he's a third-round pick, and he can't get it together. So, yeah, Rios, I liked him a lot last year, and I thought he can come on this summer. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. They signed Pac-Man Jones. So I think he's one guy that's going to be brought back, potentially. You brought up Williams. I forgot about him. I liked him a lot. And the connection with Vance Joseph, who was at Cincinnati with him, with the Bengals, he liked him. He was a fan favorite of the coaches with Joseph and Joe Woods. I don't think he has eligibility, though, for the practice squad.
You might be right. You might be right on that.
He's been on a few right now. So I think it's either the 53 or nowhere. Yeah, so I don't know. We might have seen the last of him. I would have liked for him to make it, but they just can't fit it with Kerr, McDonald, Walker, Harris. They just have too many as it is right now.
So let's get to the 53-man roster projection as best we can here on Friday. We're tracking this Friday evening. Now, again, I encourage you all to go to the website. It's right at the top in our carousel at the top of the website. Zach published his 53-man roster projection, and we'll touch on this and kind of react to it, hash it out here. But obviously, you have the Broncos coming out of the finale, keeping all three quarterbacks, Case Keenum, Chad Kelly, Paxton Lynch. Your thoughts on how you got to that point?
I've left Paxton Lynch. I've done about 3 or 4 of these roster projections over the course of the last couple months. I've left Lynch off of every single one. But like I said, I think last night he did enough for Elway to preserve and justify his ego for one more year.
Yeah.
And I think Elway pinching pennies, he's going to realize it would cost more to get rid of him than to keep him, and he threw 2 touchdowns. I do think he hangs on. I think they can keep him on as a third stringer, still develop him, still hold out hope, and have Kelly as a number 2. So I would have liked to only go with only 2 quarterbacks, but I am taking 3 on the 53.
And this is a projection based on not necessarily what Zach wants to happen. This is, trying to explain. Here's how I see it probably shaking out for your Denver Broncos. And I can't disagree. As much as I would prefer the Broncos to roll with just the 2 quarterbacks and just part ways with Paxton Lynch and eat that dead money, after a performance like that, I just don't see it happening. Now, here's the only other possibility is I believe that one of the reasons you saw the Broncos essentially run an entirely different offense when Paxton Lynch took the field is that they were trying to showcase him, and they were trying to put him in the best possible position to succeed as a means in which to sell him to the other 31 teams. Now, obviously, not all 31 teams are in the market for a young project type of quarterback, but it's possible that one of those teams that might have liked him back in the day and then kind of fell off him because of his recent history in Denver, and now they might be coming back and thinking to themselves, why keep this, whatever second or third string developmental guy we have now? Let's go out and get Paxton Lynch and give up a conditional late round pick. I think the Broncos would be willing to do that because it would unload some of that salary cap dead money, and allow them to at least come back and say, look, we were able to get something out of this botched first round pick, and as a conditional pick, who knows? He goes to that other team. If he does well, maybe they can parlay that into a higher pick, something like that. But I can't disagree with you. I think that was enough, though, Zach, for the Broncos to roll with 3, unfortunately.
Great point about that. And he had no trade value. It was even reported by Adam Schefter. Yep. And that might have bumped it up just a little bit, like you said, maybe a 2022 7th-round pick. One team to keep in mind, though, if a team wants to trade for him, take a flyer on him, the Dallas Cowboys, who wanted him in 2016. They need a quarterback behind Prescott to develop. You never know.
You never know. That's right. Yeah. I mean, the Broncos might even be willing to, if they're not willing to give up any draft capital, they'll be like, look, in the 2022 draft will buy the entire front office pizza on draft night, okay? Pizza and soda pop, we got you. But anyway, moving on here. We got running backs. Now, this is interesting. This is how I would like it to shake out in a perfect world, but we'll talk about whether or not this is in the cards. You have the Broncos keeping 4, not counting the fullback. So, well, let's just count them all together. So you got technically 5 running backs. You got Royce Freeman, Phillip Lindsay, Devontae Booker, and you got Hop Henderson making it there as the 4th halfback. And then, of course, keeping that fullback, Andy Janovich, which we know is going to happen. Now, this is exactly how I would roll it out. If the Broncos were going to keep 4 halfbacks, I would definitely make sure that D'Angelo Henderson was part of that equation. I'm trying to, I don't know, man. Are they going to keep 4? That's a question. I'm trying to still come to my own conclusion on that, but I can't disagree with these names. I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that this is exactly what the Broncos roll into the season with.
Yeah, like you said, I projected this based on what I think the Broncos will do, not what I would do. But this is the one position where this is what I want them to do. And if they do keep 5, this is the preferred 5. But there's a chance that it could come down to Booker or Henderson. Mm-hmm. I would just rather keep them all and have them all on the roster, have a run-first offense, take the pressure off Keenum, and you have a lot of different kind of running backs there that all play different styles, and they can help each other out. I do think they will keep at least 4, including Janovich. I prefer 5. I have Henderson on the roster. I think Booker will stay, and I think everyone kind of fits in where they get in.
Yep. And they can get away with doing this, carrying 5 running backs, if they go light at another position, and maybe that's tight end, which we're going to get to here in just a second. But let's talk about the wide receivers next. You have Denver keeping 6, Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Cortland Sutton, Deshaun Hamilton. Those are the 4 no-brainers. But then you have Tim Patrick as the number 5 and Isaiah McKenzie rounding out the group at 6.
I was wavering on McKenzie. I actually left him off the initial one. Then I came back to my senses because I think Joseph wants to give him one more chance.
Yep.
I think he likes him enough, and you saw his raw speed last night. He had that long punt return, and it was called back on penalty, but the guy is just super quick. You blink and you'll miss him. He has speed that's unteachable, so I think they do keep him around. They make room on the rest of the roster for another receiver. Patrick really earned his way. He was the star of the summer. I think he's a number 5 right now. A couple of players left off, though. Jordan Taylor, I think he goes to IR or PUP with that hip injury. And Carlos Henderson, he will be on the practice squad or released. But I think these 6 all play pretty well. And like the top 4 are indisputable. But it's going to come down to either 5 with Patrick or 6 with Patrick and McKenzie. I have them keeping McKenzie.
I think you're right, because there's a kind of confirmation bias involved here, because a lot of people thought, including myself initially, my thought process was, in comes Adam Jones, in comes Pac-Man. That spells certain doom for Isaiah McKenzie. But when you really think about it, and I wrote about this on Thursday night, I think what it means more for Isaiah McKenzie is that, look, we now have a fail-safe, a guy we can trust to do the job. That means there's an opportunity. We can afford to roll the dice once with you now, Isaiah McKenzie. So they carry Isaiah McKenzie on the roster, and all it takes is one flub up. All it takes is one muff. All it takes is one fumble, and he's sent packing, and Adam Jones gets moved into that position.
It's also, you think about Elway's ego, and if he cuts Lynch, let's say, that's his first-round pick in 2016, he wouldn't want to cut. He's going to cut Carlos Henderson. That's a third-round pick.
Yep.
McKenzie was a fifth-round pick. I think part of his ego kind of weighs in here, too. He doesn't want to dump his draft class, and you normally don't cut a top 5 or top 5-round pick after only 1 year. I think they give McKenzie one more chance, and like I said, his raw speed is just unteachable. I think he could help out this offense. He is the burner of the group, and I think he could be an asset if he can learn to just hold on to a football.
And there's reason to believe, just what we saw this summer, that he's figured some things out. And I think the addition of Tom McMahon as a special teams coordinator came at the perfect time in order to kind of get him back on track. And that one fumble that he did have on offense, that was just the result of a guy trying to make a play in the clutch. And I guarantee that was coached out of him immediately following the game, and especially in the film room where it's like, look, you just got to get down. In this situation, it's not about, how talented you are and how much wiggle you got and how much will to, shuck a tackler you got. You got to think about your team. and you just got to get down in that situation. So anyway, I agree with you, though. I do think the Broncos are keeping Isaiah McKenzie and Tim Patrick. They're going to roll with 6 to start out. Now we move to tight end. Here's where it gets interesting because you've got a rookie draft pick in Troy Fumagalli that you got to consider here in the roster math. You've got a trio, really, of young tight ends who, for the most part, played well in the preseason. I wouldn't go too far out on a limb as far as Austin Traylor saying he played that good. But Matt Lacoste played lights out all preseason, as one-dimensional as he might be. And even Brian Parker, he's a good blocker, and he showed out a little bit as a receiver. There's a couple of, dove moments that you wish he would have been better, like that touchdown he dropped from Chad Kelly last week. But on your roster projection, you got Hireman, Jake Butt, and Austin Traylor. The Broncos keeping only 3.
Yeah, they don't really need more than that. I think all those together, they're blockers, they're pass catchers, and Fumagalli will be put on IR, I believe. They will redshirt him like they did with Kelly and Jake Butt last year and just give him a year to get healthy and to get acclimated. But yeah, they have a solid trio. And the thing about Traylor is he didn't play lights out, but he got a lot of first-team reps in training camp, and I think that bodes well for his roster status. I was impressed with Parker and Lacoste, though. I would keep them around if possible. I'm not sure of their eligibility for the practice squad. I would try to keep one of them around. They did look good this preseason, but I don't think there's any question as to the top 3. Hireman's locked in, Jake Butt's locked in, and I think Traylor did enough in the preseason training camp this year and the regular season last year to earn his way as a number 3.
I agree with you that I think that's probably what the Broncos are going to do. They're going to keep 3, and Traylor's going to round out the group. But if I was making this decision, I would put Matt Lacoste in as the 3rd tight end. And Eric Trickle argued with me about this on Twitter on Friday because Austin Traylor, can block and catch, and Lacoste is kind of that one-trick pony as a receiver. But I just think he earned it. You got to also give guys what they deserve in terms of, you talk about competition in practice, you talk about it in training camp, in the preseason, go out and win and earn a job. And if anyone did it in the tight end core this summer, as far as what happened in preseason, now practice matters too. And as you talked about, Austin Traylor was getting some first-team reps, but I think Matt Lacoste showed out the most. So we move on here to offensive line. You have the Denver Broncos keeping 8, to wit, Garrett Bowles, Ronald Leary, Matt Paradis, Connor McGovern, Jared Valdir, and here's the swing guys, Max Garcia, Billy Turner, Cyrus Kwanjo.
Yeah, the thing about the Broncos and their offensive linemen, and I think it was very smart, was that Sean Kugler cross-trained them all to play multiple spots. So Garcia can play center. He was a center at Florida. He can play center and guard. Turner can play tackle and guard. So you're kind of getting 2 backups in one player. You don't need a backup center like Sam Jones or Slotman because Paradis never misses a snap.
Right.
So the front 5 are set, and they have 3 swing guys. They really talked up Garcia a lot. And I don't know, it's either they want to keep him or try to trade him. I think it's the former, though. And as a former 3-year starter, that's good depth to have as a backup. Not as a starter, but a backup. I think he stays. Kwanjo is that developmental guy. He's that right tackle, I think, of the future, hopefully, knock on wood, for Jared Valdir if he leaves after the season. And Billy Turner, who got a lot of run with the first team. He could play guard and tackle, like I said. So you're getting a lot of versatile guys there. They can all do many different things. I think they go a little lighter. They can keep 9. But if they can get rid of one of them, like Sam Jones, who's probably a practice squad candidate, I think they roll with 8.
Yeah, so you look at those final 3 spots. Max Garcia, Billy Turner, Cyrus Kwanjo. I think Garcia is a shoe-in barring a trade. So Garcia's making this team unless they can trade him, which probably isn't going to happen. So then it comes down to Billy Turner, Cyrus Kwanjo, and I think also Elijah Wilkinson has worked himself into the conversation. There's a reason why he was not waived on Friday. And he's another guy similar to Turner. One thing that Wilkinson has going for him is he's been playing guard and tackle. Mostly tackle, but he's been playing some guard too, like we saw in the finale. And Cyrus Kwanjo, as you guys know, those of you who've been listening to the show, I like me some Cyrus Kwanjo. I'm high on the guy. I thought he's played very well in the preseason. I like his pedigree. I like his experience playing in big games. And if you go back, watch some of that tape from the preseason, especially in the run game, man, he just blows people off the ball. So I think there's utility there, but the problem is we haven't seen him at right tackle this summer. Doesn't mean he can't play right tackle. We just haven't really seen it. So does that mean the Broncos believe he can play right tackle and it's not an issue, so they're not playing him there? Or is it because they don't think he can play right tackle, so they're keeping him at the left side? But either way, that's what puts, if Cyrus Kouandjio is on shaky ground at all, Zach, it's because he's not that he's really, of the depth guys, the only one that hasn't been cross-trained.
I'm not going to lie. I kind of struggle with Turner because he got killed this preseason on a few occasions. Yeah, he got owned for a couple sacks there.
For some reason, they love Billy Turner.
Like I said, another coaching favorite. Vance has his guys. He wasn't that good with the Dolphins, Turner was, and the Broncos signed him, and just they kept using him. So I think he has a place, but Wilkinson definitely for sure has some consideration there. Kouandjio's up in the air, but this is what it worries me. They don't have a developmental guy. Most teams have a backup tackle that they're grooming. They don't have that. They haven't had one for a while. They had to use a first-round draft pick on one and then trade for a guy in his 30s who's on the last year of his contract. Yep. They got to find that young tackle, and I don't know if they have him on the roster yet, but Kouandjio and Wilkinson definitely are intriguing. I just think Turner, based on his standing in the organization, I think he does get in.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. I think Billy Turner's making the roster. And Kouandjio, honestly, I have no qualms. I would not be sweating bullets if it was Garrett Bowles that goes down, because I think Kouandjio could hold up just fine at left tackle. But if it's the right tackle, which is the one that is probably more likely if there's going to be an injury situation, it's going to be to the older guy, that's where you got to worry. But last thing, too, before we move on, is Sam Jones played a hell of a game. The two times we saw him in the preseason, he was dominant, and you saw early on in the preseason, Bill Musgrave talked about how much he loves Sam Jones as a player. So it wouldn't surprise me to see this as a position where they end up rolling with 9, because Sam Jones, they don't want to risk him to the wire because he puts so much good tape on for the other 31 teams.
Yeah, that's a good point. And he was a draft pick, and he did play well. He can play guard and center. I just said, with Paradis, you don't have to worry about him. And are you going to carry Garcia, Turner, who's a natural guard, and Jones to convert him to guard? It's just, if you keep 9, I think he is the guy. But if they want to go running back heavy, quarterback heavy, I think they chop 1 from the offensive line.
They're going to have to make sacrifices somewhere, and it could very well be the offensive line. And really, the only reason you keep Sam Jones isn't because you plan on playing him. It's simply because you don't want to lose him. That's the only reason why you keep Sam Jones this year. But anyway, we move on. Defensive line, you've got the Broncos keeping 7. Derek Wolfe, Domata Peko, Adam Gotsis, DeMarcus Walker, Shelby Harris, Clinton McDonald, and Zach Kerr.
I'm kind of nervous. I think one of them stands to be a surprise cut, and I have a funny feeling it could be McDonald. I don't know why. It's just because he didn't live up to his I'm not going to say he didn't live up to it, but he came in injured, and he failed that physical, and he had some shoulder issues. He had a shoulder infection. Maybe Zach Kerr, who can play defensive end and nose tackle. I don't know. I have a funny feeling, though, there's going to be a surprise cut in there. But some of them are locks. Gotsis, Wolf, Peko. I think Kyle Peko, he's going to be cut and yo-yoed up and down the roster like he always is. Yeah. And DeMarcus Walker's my breakout candidate. But these 7 are all clutch. They're all very versatile as run stoppers, mostly as pass rushers, and they need that interior push. And they have some guys on there who can really get after the passer. Now, they moved Shelby Harris to nose tackle, which I thought that was very interesting. He was a defensive end last year. He was the second most sacks on the team. Do you keep Peko, who's last year was an anomaly? He was injured. He's been mostly a warrior. Do you keep him and Zach Kerr, who plays nose tackle, and Shelby Harris a nose tackle? That's why I think they can make a surprise cut. But these 7 are all good players, and I would keep all 7 if I could.
Yeah. I think McDonald, and especially when you look at how he restructured his contract, I mean, the Broncos can move on from him basically if he doesn't make the 53 pain-free. So if there is going to be a guy on the outside looking in here, it's going to be Clinton McDonald, especially because Zach Kerr had himself a hell of a summer. So I hope they keep 7. I think there's a way to do it, just like you have here on your 53. But if there's going to be a guy to go, unfortunately, it's going to be Clinton McDonald. All right, so we move on. Outside linebackers. You got the Broncos keeping 5. Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Shane Ray, Shaquille Barrett, and Mr. Jeff Holland.
I had to keep Holland after last night's game. He came off the edge. He screams off the edge. A lot of Von Miller to his game, where he converts power to speed off the edge. And, keeping 5's going to be tough. They're stacked there. I mean, when you have Shane Ray and Barrett coming in as backups, that's a good position to be in. And there was a report that came out with like D'Angelo Henderson that said teams are sniffing around Holland. Right. I would do what it takes to keep him. And especially you look at next year, the future. Ray is gone. He's going to be a free agent. He's going to walk. Barrett's going to be a free agent. He might walk. And then you're left with just Chubb and Von Miller. You need another guy to step up there, and he'd be signed for pennies. He's already shown well. I just would keep 5 if I could. And if it came down to it, if they had to keep 4 and get rid of 1, I would trade Shane Ray. I would get something in return for him right now and not let him walk for nothing last year and hope for a comp pick.
Right.
I'm a big fan of Jeff Holland. They stole him as an undrafted free agent. He had a mid-round grade at Auburn. And have him be your 5th outside linebacker, it's just great.
He's just another guy that it's not that you would really expect him to contribute much this year, but you are keeping him because you're projecting into the future, and you know that if you risk him to the waiver wire, he's gone. And Shane Ray, who knows? Even if you can't trade Shane Ray before week 1, you get into the regular season in earnest, guys are going to start going down, and needs that teams don't necessarily feel like they have today are going to start to reveal themselves before the trade deadline. And so there still is going to be an opportunity for the Broncos to move Shane Ray. You're going to want to have that 4th guy in that scenario that can step in and replace him as a rotational player. But yeah, I agree. I think you got to find a way to keep Jeff Holland, and ideally, Shane Ray hasn't shown us anything worthy of keeping him around. So if you can trade him, trade him.
I was just going to say, he's shown me nothing this preseason. Absolutely nothing. And he got a good break by coming back from that wrist injury and not missing much time. He has shown me nothing. He's been playing with 4th stringers every single game, and he's done absolutely nothing to justify. And he's been rotating in after Barrett, after Chubb, and Holland split time with him. I think that says a lot about his standing with the team. He's not put anything on tape. I think he had a sack against the Redskins. He had a one-handed sack, but this is your former first-round pick. And if it's like with Paxton Lynch, if he's coming in against backups, how great is that when you look at it in comparison to what he should be doing? So I would definitely keep Holland over Shane Ray. But another guy who I think Vance Joseph likes, and if they can, they would keep 5. If they get rid of Jeff Holland, if he's cut, he will get snatched up right away.
Yep. Can't disagree. I mean, and there's a part of me that feels bad for Shane Ray because – he's a millionaire. I don't really feel bad for him, but there's a part of me that's like, dang, he's just gotten a raw deal from the injury bug, and here he is, a former first-rounder, 3 years removed from hearing his name called on day 1, and he's seeing the rookie sit and not even play in the finale, and he's out there playing double-digit snaps, fighting for a career, fighting for a spot on the roster. So it's very humiliating for a guy like Shane Ray, a big-time former first-round pick, but that's just the situation he's in. So he's got to, if he wants that to change, that perception, he's got to be the one to change it. And hopefully, if he ends up sticking around in Denver, it happens as a Bronco, and the Broncos can capitalize on this being a contract year for him, and, ideally he's motivated, but best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So that's what you're probably going to get from Shane Ray. And the Broncos know that, so they're going to try and move him. It's just a matter of, are they going to find any takers today? If not, they might be able to find one later on in the season. But we move on here because we're running short on time. Inside linebacker, you have the Broncos keeping 4, and it gets interesting here because we have a draft pick from this year not making the final roster. You have Brandon Marshall, Todd Davis, Josie Jewell, and Alexander, used to be known as A.J. Johnson.
First of all, let me say how impressed I was about Josie Jewell in last night's game. He was just everywhere. Yep. He was just a tackling machine. There was no issue with him. I just wanted to point that out. The 4th spot, it's going to come down to Johnson, Keyshawn Bierria, and Zaire Anderson, the veteran. All those players can reasonably make it, but they gave Johnson a 3-year contract, not a 1-year contract. They gave him $50,000 guaranteed, and they talked him up in a way that suggested he was a part of their future, not just a camp body. And he was good on specials, on kickoff coverage teams. He was knifing through there and just blowing up people. So I think he does make it as the 4th. They'll put Bierria on the practice squad, and I think Anderson will be scooped up by another team. It's just the nature of the business. They can't keep 5. I think only 4 will last there. I'd rather than keep 4 there and 5 outside linebackers. So I do think Johnson gets that last spot.
Yep, it's 4. They always carry 4. It's just a question of who is that 4th guy going to be. Now, you go into the finale. I wrote about it many times. Keyshawn Bierria, up until the finale, hadn't even shown enough in my book to even earn a practice squad spot, let alone a regular roster spot. But he managed to play his best game, had his most productive game in the finale. He still wasn't great, but he was around the ball a lot more, made a couple of plays late in the game. So he's definitely getting waived, no question about it. But he might still now end up on the practice squad, which is good because, he's a 6th-round pick. But I agree with you. There's a reason why they paid Alexander Johnson the way they did. They've kind of had to ease him in because it's been 3 years. There's a reason why he's not getting 25, 30 snaps a game. And I think they're going to continue to do that through special teams and just hope that they really only have to rely on one depth linebacker this season, and that's Josie Jewell, who just has been an absolute gem. Anyway, cornerback. You got the Broncos keeping 5 here. Chris Harris, Bradley Roby, Tremaine Brock, Mr. Pac-Man Jones, and Isaac Yiadom. So you've got, obviously we already know Marcus Rios is gone, but you got Brendan Langley hitting the bricks.
So long, Brendan. Yeah, the experiment has to come to an end. He hasn't shown me anything last year, this year, that I don't have confidence in Vance Joseph, even being a former secondary coach, building him up. He's just gotten worse and worse. He can't even get his head around in passing situations. So I would not keep him. I would definitely keep only 5. And they had 5 last year for most of the regular season. I think they can get by. And Pac-Man Jones is pretty durable. You have no problems with Tremaine Brock, Roby, Harris. Yiadom can be that 5th guy. They can ease him in, not have a trial by fire. And they have to go light at certain positions if they want to keep other players around. This is one of those positions. Yeah. I do have them keeping 5, and they send – hopefully maybe can get a draft pick for Langley, but I doubt it. I think he does hit the bricks.
Yeah, and I think there was some debate about this on Twitter, but turns out, yes, Brandon Langley does have plenty of practice squad eligibility left. I really don't think he's shown enough. I mean, the only thing he has going for him in terms of being a risk to be claimed on the wire is his 3rd-round pedigree, but the league knows – I mean, this guy was overdrafted by the Broncos. He should have gone 2 rounds later at the soonest. So I think there's a better than 50-50 shot that when the Broncos waive Brendan Langley, he can make it through waivers and thus be re-signed to the practice squad where he can stay within the organization and maybe, hopefully, someday soon, maybe next year, though, capitalize on that raw potential and athleticism that the Broncos fell in love with. So we move on to the safety, and this is one where it's going to hurt. I mean, there's guys that deserve a roster spot here that are going to be on the outside looking in. You've got the Broncos keeping 4 in Justin Simmons, Darian Stewart, Sua Cravens, and Will Parks.
I was happy to see Sua Cravens on the field. Finally, it seemed like they traded for an imaginary player, and he's been invisible, but he looked pretty good last night. He was knifing in there. I had a big hit on the ball carrier. I think he does stay because they gave up a draft pick for him, and he can be that solution to covering running backs and tight ends. They have to find that solution. He could be it. Will Parks is a big-time favorite of Vance Joseph and his staff, so I think he stays. Thomas, I wanted to give him the spot. I wanted to keep 5 safeties. It's just not realistic when you want to keep 3 quarterbacks, 5 running backs, 5 outside linebackers. You got to get rid of someone. And Thomas had a great game against the Redskins, but in my opinion, he kind of slipped a little yesterday. He wasn't as much of a playmaker, and he was playing into the 4th quarter of that game. So that didn't say much about his roster standing. He can be brought back on the practice squad, which I think he surely will be. He might even be snatched off of it. I can't justify keeping more than 4 safeties. You gave up a draft pick for Cravens. Parks is a favorite. You got to roll with 4, and I think they have a good 4 in tow already.
You could see the rust falling off Cravens a little bit, but he was just a physical presence on that back end of the defense. And, once he gets his game legs under him, he's going to be a weapon for that Broncos defense, but it's not going to happen overnight. He really is not. I mean, the reason he had the knee issue, notwithstanding, the fact that he's been out of the football for over a year, really, as far as the actual grind and keeping your body right and staying healthy and everything, it's going to take some time to build up that endurance. But he's going to see snaps on defense. Meanwhile, Will Parks is going to be the guy they rely on more. initially early on in the season as that dime backer to step in on the big nickel packages and play some linebacker / safety. But I don't disagree with you. I think, unfortunately, DeMonte Thomas has to go. I think there's a 50-50 shot, even 50-50 odds, that he can make it through to the practice squad and be available if something happens to one of the other guys. But we move on. Lastly, you got the 3 specialists, no competition, they made it. So that's how it's looking. Obviously, there could be some changes. We don't know what guys the Broncos have circled as far as their pro personnel departments across the league that they've got their eye on. There might be guys on another roster today that the Broncos like more than Jeff Holland or D'Angelo Henderson or even Will Parks. So Paxton Lynch. So, there's still a lot up in the air. Let's not forget that this time last year, TJ Ward sat down, didn't even dress for the preseason finale because he was a first-team former Pro Bowler. The next day, gone, waived. So anything can happen. Here's to hoping, though, that the Broncos make some good decisions and the right guys are selected to stick on this roster because I think it's going to be one hell of a season. But that's all the time we got for today. Zach and I, we have a life to live. We love you guys, but we got things to do as well. But you can find Zach on Twitter at Kelberman247, myself at Chad N. Jensen. And again, guys, make sure you're subscribing, whether you're on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, YouTube listeners. Shout out to all you guys. We love you. No matter where you're listening, though, make sure you're subscribing because it's going to be a wild ride. Stay safe. Have fun on Labor Day weekend. For Zach Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.